Hi, curious people. Tonight we dive into the forbidden archives of Versailles, not into its glittering hall of mirrors, but into the shadowy, wooded grounds of a secluded estate known as the Parc aux Cerfs, a place where the absolute power of a king curdled into absolute boredom, and where that boredom created a secret world of whispered orders, silk-lined carriages, and terrified young girls. Picture this. You're not a courtier in powdered perfection. You are a young woman, pulled from a humble Parisian street, told you are to serve the king. Your heart pounds as a carriage, its royal crest discreetly covered, rattles through a private gate. You are led to a small, lavishly furnished house. You are given fine clothes, rich food, and one simple, terrifying instruction. Be ready. You are now a resident of the Deer Park, the most secret and sordid harem of 18th century Europe. You wouldn't have survived an hour in their gilded nightmare, trapped between the promise of luxury and the reality of being a disposable plaything for the man they called God on earth. So before you settle in, take a second to like this video and subscribe. But only if you truly enjoy discovering the darker side of history. And tell me in the comments, which royal dynasty scandals shock you the most? The Bourbons? The Romanovs? The Tudors? Now dim the lights, turn up the volume, and let's step into the shadows of power. Our story begins not with a sordid secret, but with a very public and very well-known fact. Louis XV, the great-grandson of the Sun King, Louis XV inherited a throne that was the envy of the world. He was handsome, beloved, and ruled over a court that was the glittering epicenter of global culture, art, and power. Versailles was a machine designed to worship the monarch, every ritual, from his waking to his sleeping, a public spectacle. But this is where the irony deepens and the rot begins. To be constantly watched is to be perpetually alone. The man who had everything found himself crushed by the weight of it all, suffocated by the endless ceremony and the politics of 1,000 nobles vying for his attention. His ennui wasn't just a passing mood. It was a spiritual sickness of absolute power, a kind of royal burnout that modern CEOs might recognize, but with far more devastating consequences. He began to seek escape, not from power, but from the prison of his own spectacle. And this is where we introduce our first key player, a woman whose role in this drama is the subject of fierce historical debate, Madame de Pompadour. She was not just the king's mistress, she was his best friend, his political partner, the true First Minister of France in all but name, a commoner who mastered the art of the court so completely, she became its queen. She was cultured, witty, and fiercely intelligent, but she was also acutely aware that her position depended on one thing, holding the king's interest. And as the years passed, the romantic and physical side of their relationship, it's widely believed, began to fade. The king's eyes and his desires began to wander. A lesser woman might have raged. A foolish one would have pleaded. Pompadour, the ultimate strategist, did something utterly cold-blooded. She decided to manage the king's affairs. She would become the master of ceremonies of his desire, choosing mistresses she could control, ensuring that any new favorite would be indebted to her, not a rival against her. It was a breathtakingly cynical move, turning her own replacement into a political pawn. But the king's tastes were changing. The sophisticated court ladies, with their politics and their pretensions, began to bore him. He didn't want conversation, he wanted conquest. He didn't want a partner, he wanted a purge. He developed a taste for novelty, for innocence, or at least the appearance of it. He wanted young women, very young women, from outside the court, untouched by its machinations. This presented a logistical problem. How does the most famous man in France discreetly pursue affairs with shopkeepers' daughters and seamstresses without causing a monumental scandal? The answer was the Parc aux Cerfs, not a grand palace, but a collection of unassuming small houses on the grounds of a royal hunting lodge in Versailles, hidden from prying eyes. This was the engine room of the king's secret life, a system built for efficiency and deniability. And here is our first shocking, little-known detail. The operation was run like a sinister spy agency. The king's valet and a network of discreet agents, including a notorious procuress named Madame Bertrand, would act as scouts, combing Paris for suitable girls. The criteria were simple: youth, beauty, and naivety. They were approached with offers of work or simply abducted, brought to the Parc aux Cerfs, and told they were to serve a mysterious, powerful Polish nobleman, a thin disguise for the king. The routine was always the same. The girl would be bathed, perfumed, dressed in fine linens, and fed a lavish meal. Then she would wait. A secret passage connected the houses to the lodge. Often the king would arrive after dark, masked or disguised. The encounters were brief, transactional, and utterly lonely. There was no courtship, no romance, just the performance of a duty to a remote and godlike figure. If a girl became pregnant, she was quietly moved to a convent, given a sum of money, and the child was taken away to be raised anonymously. If the king grew bored, which he almost always did, the same process occurred: a payment, a silence, and a return to her old life, her youth and innocence now a spent currency. They were human antidepressants, consumed and discarded. This is the midpoint of our story, the core of the scandal. But what transforms this from a tale of predatory lust into something far more psychologically complex is what happened next. The king, the man who sought these encounters to escape his own spiritual decay, found no solace in them. Each visit to the Parc aux Cerfs left him emptier, more mired in guilt and self-loathing. He became increasingly paranoid, obsessed with death and disease, constructing ever more elaborate rituals of purification after his visits. The cure was poisoning the patient. The hunter was becoming haunted by his own prey. And what of the girls? Their fates are the true hidden tragedy of Versailles. Some, of course, used the money to secure a half-decent marriage, forever hiding their past. Others were broken by the experience, their lives ruined. But one story stands out, a name that has survived the centuries: Louise O'Murphy. She was the daughter of an Irish soldier, a breathtakingly beautiful young woman immortalized in a famously risque painting by Francois Boucher. Lying on her stomach, her back to the viewer. A piece of art that was essentially a brochure for the king's pleasure. She became a favorite, but she made a fatal error. Ambitious and perhaps unaware of the intricate web she was in, she allegedly made a play for the queen's position, overestimating her own power and underestimating Pompadour's. The reaction was swift and brutal. She was married off to a nobleman within days and exiled from court. Her story is a perfect microcosm of the entire system. A moment of fleeting glory followed by a lifetime of consequence, a pawn sacrificed by the true queen of the board. Which brings us to the open historiographical debate that still rages among scholars today. Was Madame de Pompadour the architect of this system, or was she its ultimate victim? Did she coldly engineer the Parc aux Cerfs to maintain her political power, effectively pimping for the king to keep her seat at his side? Or was she a trapped woman herself, a victim of the same oppressive system, forced to make an unbearable choice between total power and total obscurity? To facilitate his affairs was to secure her influence, but it also meant presiding over the very thing that eroded their intimate connection. It's a dark mirror to the dilemmas faced by women in power throughout history, forced to compromise their own autonomy to maintain a seat at the table. There are memos, letters that suggest she was intimately involved in the selection process. But were these the actions of a master manipulator or a heartbroken survivor doing her grim duty? The archives may never give us a definitive answer, and that ambiguity is what makes this scandal so endlessly fascinating. So, as the glittering facade of Versailles began to crack, as the debt from wars and extravagance mounted and the seeds of the French Revolution were sown, the king retreated more and more into his secret world. The Parc aux Cerfs became not just a harem, but a metaphor for the entire ancient regime. A gilded cage built on a foundation of exploitation, secrecy, and a profound disconnect from reality. The people of France, starving and angry, began to whisper of the king's debauchery, the rumors growing more monstrous with each telling. They called him Louis the Well-Beloved no longer. The man who sought escape from his crown in the arms of anonymous girls had, in doing so, crafted the very weapon that would help destroy it. The system outlived both him and Pompadour. It was only dismantled as he neared the end of his life, a futile attempt at repentance. But the damage was done. The girls of the Parc aux Cerfs vanished back into the crowds of Paris, their stories mostly lost, silent witnesses to the truth that absolute power doesn't just corrupt the powerful, it consumes everyone in its orbit. The Palace of Versailles stands today as a monument to a lost world of unimaginable beauty and brutality, a place where light and shadow were forever locked in a dance of deadly desire. And if you listen closely in its quiet, wooded corners, you can almost still hear the rustle of silk and the whispered promises that were never meant to be kept. So tell me, as you reflect on this gilded cage of desire, were the women like Madame de Pompadour and the girls of the Deer Park victims of a king's corrupted heart? Or were they, in their own ways, accomplices in the system that bound them? And which other blood-stained scandal, hidden behind a crown, should we dare to uncover next? Power built empires, but desire destroyed them. You've been watching Royal Taboo Archives. Until next time, dare to uncover the forbidden.